We are back for the 3DownNation podcast. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm John Hodge, joined by JC the Cheese Abbott. JC, you're back in Vancouver, or at least near Vancouver, from your week in Kelowna. How did you enjoy the mainland?
I loved the interior, Hodge. I don't live on an island. It's not the mainland.
Well,
Vancouver is
whatever,
also
the Okanagan,
the main.
Kelowna,
Yeah, well,
the interior. What other names are there for it?
so the interior is sort of the broad terminology for everything that's not on the coast. The Okanagan is the area around Kelowna, so I was there on game days. I spent most of the week up in the Kootenays, which is another region, sort of more mountainous, a little bit closer to the Alberta border. So saw much of our great province of British Columbia this past week, and probably more of it than I wanted yesterday when I was driving through a slow procession through the mountains back from Kelowna, as we had that nice holiday weekend traffic and lots of construction, though seemingly no construction workers out there on the road. Hodge, just a lot of cones slowing everybody down.
I have never been to the interior of BC, though it is on my bucket list. But I am no stranger to construction zones completely devoid of workers. That is a Manitoba special. We love having construction zones with no construction. And then 2 months later, the cones get taken down, and you're like, did anything get improved? Did the road get fixed? Somehow the answer seems to always be no. But we're simultaneously fixing every road and none of the roads. And for the record, in Manitoba, we also do not have an interior or the mainland. We just call everything the flat part, which is Manitoba. And I say it with love. Lifelong Manitoba resident, proud Manitoban. But yeah, we be flat.
Got a north though, there is different
That's
areas.
true. That's true. Northern Manitoba probably starts at like Flin Flon, and then, they got the Paw, and then, of course, Churchill is at least Canada famous. I've also spoken to Americans in the past, and they've brought up Churchill. So it seems like Churchill does have some world fame to it, being the polar bear city. Admittedly, I've never been, but it is also on my bucket list. So one day I'll get up to Churchill, and who knows, maybe that's one day where the CFL will put its 10th team, the Manitoba Polar Bears.
I must admit, I was 25 years old before I learned that Flin Flon wasn't a made-up place.
Well, Flin Flon is a real place. I've never been, but I know people from Flin Flon. It's a true place. And the Paw, spelled P-A-S, I pitched that when the Bombers renamed their stadium to Princess Auto Stadium. I said, should we call it the Paw? P-A-S, and it didn't really catch on. That's okay. We got lots to get into, JC, so let's waste no time. Today, we're discussing Ryan Dinwiddie going off on the Ottawa Redblacks.
Vernon Adams Jr. having one of the best performances in recent CFL history.
The BC Lions finally getting their first win of the season.
Zach Collaros missing his friend Travis Kelce's wedding.
And a Canadian TV reality series making an appearance in Kelowna. But first,
the final game in Week 5 had two starting quarterbacks suffer injuries. Zach Collaros sustained an upper body issue in the second quarter, and Bo Levi Mitchell's left foot was caught on the turf as Jake Ceresna sacked him in the third quarter. Mitchell was taken by ambulance off the field. Canadian Taylor Elgersma took the helm for Winnipeg and helped the Blue Bombers come back for a 14-13 win over the Tiger Cats. Hamilton used national Trey Ford and Jake Dolegala after Mitchell went down. Which team is in more trouble if their franchise QB is out for an extended period of time?
The answer is the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and we'll get into the Bombers later in the segment, but first thing that has to be said is this sucked. It was terrible. It was awful. Not just for Bo Levi Mitchell, not just for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, but I genuinely believe the entire Canadian Football League. Bo Levi Mitchell was off to an exceptional start to the season. 9 touchdown passes, only 1 interception. He was on pace for the best season of his career, which is saying something considering he's a 2-time CFL MOP and also a 2-time East Division finalist for MOP. This is a guy who at age 36 was playing the best football of his career. That's what head coach Scott Milanovich said post-game. And there is no formal update on his status. So all we know is what we saw live and on the replays. And it did appear as though that left foot hung kind of limp in the air. Bo clutched it. I don't want to speculate regarding what the injury could be. I don't think that'd be responsible, but I think it's fair to say that just based on the fact that he was immediately taken to hospital in an ambulance, it's a serious injury and he's going to miss a considerable amount of time. For what it's worth, Bo released a statement on Monday morning saying that he wants to be back on the field as soon as possible. He also thanked everyone for the support, including his teammates who visited him in hospital post-game. But to me, the real issue here on the field for the Tiger Cats was how badly Trey Ford and Jake Dolegala played in this one. I didn't like that they traded off. I thought that made no sense at all. Scott Milanovich said post-game that the reason that was done was because he said, well, some guys, had more familiarity with certain plays than others, which I kind of heard and went, what? How? That doesn't make any sense to me. These are both like 5-year CFL veterans. Like Trey Ford has been in this league since 2022. He's 28 years old, and Jake Dolegala's been in the league longer, and he's even older. Like, this is not a case where it's like, oh, geez, we have 2 raw rookies behind Bo, and it'd be completely irresponsible in week 1 to throw them out there because they don't even know the playbook yet. It's like, these are veterans in week 5. How do certain guys have more comfort with certain plays than others? And again, neither necessarily did anything to endear themselves, I think, to the Steel Town faithful. Trey Ford, 3 of 7 for 12 yards and a pick. He had a couple particularly errant throws. Should be noted, he did have a nice ball down the seam that was catchable and arguably should have been caught by Kenny Lawler for a touchdown, but that was not the case. And then Dolegala, 0 for 2. One of those incompletions should have been intercepted by the Blue Bombers. So if I'm the Saskatchewan Roughriders, the team that is hosting the Hamilton Tiger Cats in week 6, I am licking my chops seeing these 2 quarterbacks play because it's going to presumably be one of those 2 under center to start. Whether they both play or not remains unclear, but they struggled really badly after Mitchell left this game. And the Hamilton Tiger Cats, after a super promising start to the season, again, led by an incredible performance from Bo Levi Mitchell through the first, we'll call it 3.5 games of the year, I think are suddenly in big trouble.
I absolutely agree with you, Hodge, and neither of us are medical professionals, and there's been no official update on Bo, so we don't know how long he's going to be out, but I think it's safe to say that it will be at least some time. Now, whether that's a few weeks with a dislocated ankle or whether it's longer term with something that's seriously broken, like we saw with Chad Kelly a couple of years ago, we don't know quite yet. But however long it is, the Ticats are going to really struggle. And Trey Ford was a bit of an awkward fit for that organization with a coach like Scott Milanovich. It's a guy who likes certain levels of efficiency in his quarterbacks, right? He almost benched Bo when he first came in as the head coach because of turnovers. Well, Trey Ford is a wild stallion, and that's what makes him good. It also what has made him struggle at points in his CFL career. And then on the flip side, I don't think Jake Dolegala gives you anything that excites you going forward, at least if you're Winnipeg. And I do believe the injury to Zach Collaros is less serious, or at least it seemed that way. You just brought in Drew Brown, and he wasn't dressed for that game. Taylor Elgersma took his first meaningful snaps as a CFL quarterback and didn't look great. But Brown is available. He should be familiar with the offense at this point, especially considering he was with Tommy Condell in Ottawa and has been in Winnipeg in the past. And he can take over and competently steer this team. And arguably, in some aspects of his game, may even give you a little bit more than Zach at this stage of his career in terms of his ability to huck it down the field if that's what you ask him to do, even though Ryan Dinwiddie seems to question Drew Brown's arm strength. I think he's got the ability to go deep if he wants to, which Zach has struggled a little bit with over the last 2 years. So Winnipeg is going to be okay. This could be a season altering, dare I say, season ending blow to the Hamilton Tiger Cats, depending on the severity of Bo's leg.
Well, let's get into the Drew Brown thing a little bit. This has been really weird. Like, Drew Brown was acquired as of the recording of the show 13 days ago. The Tiger Cats and Bombers played yesterday as of the recording of this show. And Mike O'Shea is out here saying, I wouldn't put Drew Brown out there without the full playbook at his disposal. And it's like, okay, I agree that football is a game where the playbook is extensive, particularly if you're a quarterback. There's a lot to learn, but this is not a guy who's been dropped randomly into a team and been asked to play immediately. Like, I think I remember, this is, going 10 years ago. Matt Nichols started a game for the Bombers on something like 2 practices. And I think afterwards he essentially said, yeah, I basically made an effort to know where Nick Moore was on every play because he was our best receiver. But other than that, I didn't really know what was going on, right? That's not a situation you want to put a quarterback in. And I'm paraphrasing for Matt Nichols, by the way, and going off 10 years of memory. So take it with a grain of salt. But this is nothing like that situation. Drew Brown has played with a lot of these guys before. He's played with Nick Dembski. He's played with Brady Oliveira. He's played behind a lot of these offensive linemen. And he spent the last 2 years in Ottawa in Tommy Condell's system. There's a lot that is the same with this offense relative to the one he played the last few years. And I was at practice in Winnipeg on Tuesday, his first day of practice back with the club, and he did nothing. He stood there, he watched as the other 3 quarterbacks did their thing. It almost looked like he was hurt. And I'm not saying he was hurt. I'm just saying if you didn't know the context of the practice and you just showed up and watched it, you'd think, oh, that number 4 must be hurt because he's not doing anything. And that is really bizarre. And I wasn't at practice on Thursday, but reportedly he didn't really participate on Thursday either. So that's a big problem for a Blue Bombers team that will have Monday and Tuesday off. They'll practice on Wednesday. For what it's worth, the practice is closed and quarterbacks will not be made available to the media. So we will have no idea what goes on with the quarterback situation unless Mike O'Shea chooses to share it on Wednesday, which I'm confident in predicting he will not. And then Thursday, they'll declare a depth chart. So the point is, if you're a Bombers fan who's sitting there wondering, what the heck is going on with this quarterback situation? Who's going to start? Is Zach healthy? Whatever. We probably won't know anything till Thursday. But the fact that Brown wasn't even dressed is weird to me. And I appreciate a guy needs to have the full playbook and, there's something to be said for comfort level, but you could have even dressed him as an emergency third stringer and had Taylor Elgersma do the short yardage. And as for Elgersma, I thought he was fine, right? The stats are okay. 11 of 15 for 86 yards and a touchdown. It should be noted the touchdown came on a very short shovel pass. Ontario Wilson did all the work, got some great blocks from Stanley Bryant and from Nick Dembski getting around the edge, and it was set up by a brilliant return from Trey Vavel, who, for my money, I wrote this in my post-game column, could be the best player on the whole team. He's been unbelievable this year for them, again, as the reigning most outstanding rookie and most outstanding special teams player in the CFL. And I share your thoughts, JC. It did not look to me like Collaros suffered a serious injury. Again, I don't want to speculate about particulars, but there have been, in the last few seasons, games where he's left, the team has held him out in the second half, later terming it a precautionary measure. He did seem to need a moment to kind of collect himself on the turf. Like, I'm just speaking from what I saw through TSN's camera lens, but my interpretation of what I saw was Zach took the hit, he laid on the turf, teammates tried to help him up, and he made like this gesture, like almost like, I just need 1 second, and he kind of collected himself, and then after a moment, he was able to get himself off the turf under his own power, and he left the field under his own power. He was on the sidelines in his full uniform for the rest of the game. He even came onto the field to wish Bo off well to the ambulance. So, like, this is not a guy who clearly suffered some devastating injury where he needed to be taken to hospital right away. Like, this is not I don't think a serious injury. Again, I don't want to speculate about particulars, but none of the evidence that we've seen so far would suggest that Zach Collaros is going to miss a whole bunch of time. And I agree that with Brown, assuming he actually dresses and gets on the field, I think will handle his duties just fine if in fact he is the starter for the next little bit. Or we'll see. Maybe Zach is available for week 6. We don't know yet. But the Ticats, it's a worrying situation. And I'll also say this. I think it was fair early in Trey Ford's career to give him the benefit of the doubt. This is a guy who was pulled straight out of U Sports and very quickly as a rookie was thrust into the starting lineup on an offense that was miserable. His offensive coordinator that season is no longer in the CFL, and for good reason. His offenses were very poor towards the end of his tenure in this league. And I mean, the reporting is kind of messy about exactly what happened in Edmonton, but I think it's fair to say that at the very least, Trey Ford was not set up for a ton of success in that city the first 3 years he was there under Chris Jones. I think he was given a very fair shake under Jordan Maximic and Mark Killam in 2025. He did not take advantage. Cody Fajardo, of course, won the starting job. The rest is history there. Well, if there's one person in the league, at least in my opinion, who you would trust to get Trey Ford to take his game to the next level, it's Scott Milanovich, a guy who early in the careers of Trevor Harris, Zach Collaros, helped turn them into franchise guy, a guy who helped Ricky Ray have an incredible late season surge with the Toronto Argonauts, a guy who has helped Bo Levi Mitchell have a very similar late career surge, a guy who helped Anthony Calvillo do a similar thing back in Milanovich's days with the Montreal Alouettes, having these fantastic late career resurgences, working with Hall of Famers. Like by the time these guys' careers done, Milanovich may have led 5 quarterbacks, or at least helped 5 quarterbacks get into the Canadian Football League Hall of Fame. Most coaches cannot say the same thing. And so the fact that after he's been there for a couple months, dating back to the start of training camp, Ford looked no better, and if anything worse than he's previously looked, is a big concern for me. I don't want to throw the kid completely under the bus, but he's also not really a kid anymore. This is a 28-year-old. He's a 5th-year CFL player. If Trey Ford is going to be a guy or be the guy, he needs to start showing it now.
Yeah, 2 things that you mentioned there that I just want to touch on. First of all, on Trey Ford, completely agree with you that the narrative about him is skewed right now. He's at the stage where he has to prove it or we have to move on, right? That's just the reality of pro football. But if I was to push back, I would say that I don't know that we have yet seen a team say, okay, Trey, just be Trey, right? The narrative is always, well, if they can get him to do this and that like a traditional passer, and then we add in the sprinkle of what makes him special, he could be exceptional. And that has never happened. Why don't we just let him be him? Because I truly think there's no other quarterback, certainly in the CFL, perhaps in pro football, with his particular skill set. And I don't know that we've ever seen it fully unleashed. We've seen it mostly constrained. We've seen coaches upset that he couldn't live within those constraints. I would like to see somebody just say, hands off the wheel, whatever happens, happens. Let's just see Ford to the max and what that looks like. Maybe it's a massive failure. It's entirely possible that it could be, but at least we'll know. And I'm not sure Scott Milanovich, who again is very particular with his quarterbacks, and it's part of why he's had so much success, is that guy. Jordan Maximic, same thing, very successful with his quarterbacks and his offenses, but very particular. I didn't think he was that guy. I don't know that Trey Ford has had that guy yet. And then on Zach Collaros, I do think it's worth touching on the narratives that emerged after that game, in terms of people assuming it's a head injury. And we don't know that it's not a head injury, but we've been through this dog and pony show before in terms of Zach's health, because he does have the history of concussions. But I think it's important that we note he also has a history of a nagging neck injury, right? And that's the same general vicinity of the body that was injured. I don't think anyone should be jumping to a conclusion as to which area of the upper body was hurt here, because there is precedent for that neck as well. And we know as a 37-year-old quarterback, sometimes those nagging injuries stick with you quite a bit longer. So that is worth putting out there for people who are concerned about Collaros' long-term brain health.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule, whether you're media, whether you're a fan, or just a person who's alive, not jumping to conclusions is generally a good principle by which to live your life. And I agree. There have been times in the past where everyone's labeled, oh, that's obviously head injury. And it was a neck. That is factual to say. If you are going off of the official reports that the team files, for what it's worth, Zach has also been listed on the injury report in the last few years at least one point with a head injury. So I've spoken to some colleagues in the media who don't believe the neck designation. They're very skeptical of that, saying, they're just making that up. It's actually a head. Well, I'm not going to sit here and say the team is lying. I'm not going to sit here and say that no team would ever lie. I'm not going to make any assumptions. I'm just relaying what the official information is. And for what it's worth, Zach, I mean, this happened last year in the Banjo Bowl when Milt Stegall called for Zach to retire. And there was all this outpouring of concern. Some of it, I think, genuine. Some of it, I think, probably not regarding Zach. And Zach spoke for himself when he returned from injury and essentially said, look, I appreciate the concern, but like I wouldn't be playing this game if I didn't feel like I could still do it and also be a healthy person. So Zach is speaking for himself, and I think Zach is the only one who should get to speak for Zach. I'm not going to try to speak for Zach. I'm not going to tell Zach what to do, and we'll wait and see for what the diagnosis is because we don't know. And again, I don't think it's in anybody's best interest to speculate about, super particulars about injuries. I think it's fair to speculate Bo hurt his leg, right? That's what he grabbed. I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, I think it was this bone and he hurt it this way. And oh, look, and the way he grabbed, like, no, I don't want to get into that. We don't have the information. Let's let the super highly trained, highly paid medical professionals figure that out and figure it out with Bo, because obviously he will be part of this process as well. And I will just say, we should do this with every injury. We wish everybody the best, right? In sports media, we're trained not to cheer for anything. Personally, I think that's kind of hogwash. I cheer for everyone to stay healthy, and I cheer for great storylines. And Bo Levi Mitchell and Zach Collaros having great years late into their CFL careers is a great storyline. And it sucks so badly that this game that may have otherwise been a great, fantastic, super highly entertaining contest became an ugly slugfest. It was the worst game of the CFL season so far. I don't think that's controversial to say. Hopefully everyone gets better, and let's hope that, it was inevitable someone was going to get hurt at the quarterback position in 2026. We weren't going to see every starter play all 18 games. That was not realistic, but let's hope that maybe this is the worst, because the league has been unbelievably fun to watch so far this year. And if quarterbacks stop dropping like flies, that's no longer going to be true. And last thing I'll say on this, by the way, I talked about it back in January and February. We talked about it on the show. The Hamilton Tiger Cats letting Taylor Powell walk did not make sense in the offseason. And I think they will come to rue that decision over the next few weeks, if, in fact, Bo misses considerable time. Ottawa Redblacks head coach and general manager Ryan Dinwiddie unleashed on his players after his team dropped to 0-4 following a 27-22 loss to Saskatchewan. Could his pointed comments galvanize the locker room?
I am skeptical that they will. And sometimes pointed comments do galvanize a team, particularly when you're trying to spark a turnaround and guys are looking for something to rally around. But we've seen Dinwiddie do this in the past. He did it 2 or 3 times last year in Toronto. It didn't work. For what it's worth, the Toronto Argonauts received the worst coaching staff grade in the CFL, according to the CFLPA report card after that year. So that's not entirely based just on Dinwiddie, but I'm sure it played a factor if players were upset about being called out specifically and publicly in the media. And in the case of this particular post-game rant, Hodge, while I agree that there's some points that Dinwiddie touches on that are valid, there's so many things that undermine his points that I think he loses credibility from what he said. Let's start with the fact that he's fixated on the fact that they've taken penalties. He says it's beyond him, the penalties that they've taken. Well, the Ottawa Redblacks had 6 penalties in that game for 37 yards. That is lower than the average of any single team entering week 5. Like, it was not an egregiously undisciplined performance, and that's not to say you can't nitpick some timely penalties or maybe some egregious errors or things of that nature, but that didn't seem to be what Dinwiddie was doing. He was calling his team undisciplined, and he's said that they lacked football intelligence as a result of all of these penalties, when in reality, there wasn't very many of them. That, to me, will leave people scratching their heads. And then some of his comments when calling out the referees indicate that he doesn't even know the rules of football, let alone the CFL. Like, you're telling me you've been in this sport your entire life. You've won 2 Grey Cups. You've quarterbacked at the professional level, and you are unaware that an elbow touching the ground is treated the same as a knee? What are you talking about at that stage? How can someone take you seriously? So I love it when coaches express their personality and are frank and give us great quotes, because it makes for fantastic articles. But I think Ryan Dinwiddie has to be really cognizant here going forward of what he says publicly, because his locker room is watching him. And this is not a team where he has built previous cachet. This is a new organization. And some of the messages that he sent in that post-game address just weren't conducive to a turnaround in my mind.
Yeah, he talked a lot about how, well, you can't coach guys not to take penalties. And it's like, I think the comment was kind of made in reference to a particularly egregious moment on special teams where one of Ottawa's blockers just kind of tackled a guy. But like, coaching penalties is a huge part of coaching, right? There's old stories about Bill Belichick being like, oh, we're playing a team wearing red jerseys this week. Everybody get your red gloves on, because that'll allow us to hold and get away with that penalty, right? Like, drawing the line, whether it's kind of dirty like that or whether it's legit, here's where you can place the block, here's where you can't place the block, like setting up players for success in terms of what they are and are not allowed to do is a huge part of coaching, particularly in a league where a lot of your guys didn't play 3-down football in college, and in some cases have never played 3-down football prior to coming to the Canadian Football League. So that didn't particularly make a lot of sense to me. He also was really upset about the return touchdown. I think that's fair, given that Noah Getman, the team's punter, just had to walk in front of Matthew Sexton and did not do that, and then tried to push him out of bounds, and it was maybe the worst tackle attempt I've ever seen in my life. It's true that kickers aren't really required to be great tacklers, nor are they expected to be, but even by punting standards, it was a low moment. So I appreciate the frustration, but I also don't particularly like seeing this from a team this early in the year. Nobody anticipated the Ottawa Redblacks were going to be a powerhouse in 2026. This was always going to be the kind of team that had to be scrappy, right? Had to out physical teams, had to win the gritty ones. And maybe that's why this loss particularly hurts, because the Redblacks, I thought, did a really nice job of showing grit, particularly on defense. When Trevor Harris tried to go to the quick passing game, they were jumping routes to Kean Schaefer-Baker and Samuel Emilus. They were getting up, they were getting physical, which I thought was really exciting. It's like, whew, okay, you're taking away the short stuff. You're making Trevor Harris beat you long. That's a risky thing to do, because Trevor Harris, I think, can beat you long. But all in all, I thought it was a good performance from Ottawa's defense. They limited Saskatchewan to only 329 net yards. They actually outgained the Riders slightly, and they held Saskatchewan to just 5.7 yards per play. And particularly in a league so far where the numbers offensively have been off the charts, that's really good. When you're at home and you hold your opponent to 5.7 yards, you should win. So maybe that's part of where this frustration comes from. And I think it's fair to say that the Red Blacks let this one slip through their fingers. They could have easily won it. But yeah, going nuclear in week 4, when you are a team that again week 5, when you are again a team that didn't have very high expectations, like you almost risk killing the confidence that you've built. And so I'm not a Red Blacks player. I can't speak for them. I don't know how they felt in the locker room, but these are the kind of comments that I wouldn't have felt particularly thrilled about my head coach making after a loss.
I think part of it too, Hodge, is I don't even know that unleashing or going nuclear are accurate descriptions of what Ryan Dinwiddie did, having listened to that press conference, because I've seen him irate, right? This is a guy who we know has a bit of an angry streak sometimes. I don't think he was. He was clearly disappointed and upset that this game had slipped away from them, as you described, but it was almost like verbal vomit. Like he was saying more than he intended to. Like he couldn't hold himself back. It wasn't, red in the face and screaming. It was talking himself into, further corners and problems, and saying things that maybe he'll regret in the long run. I look at some of the comments about the quarterback play. He's asked about Jake Maier, who I thought played a solid, respectable game. Certainly wasn't the reason that Ottawa lost, put them in a position late in the game where, had they been able to get 6 inches, they probably would have pulled off the victory. And he starts out in the very typical coach speak manner that you and I have both heard thousands of times, where, oh yeah, I'm sure there's some plays that we would want back. Then he gets more specific and dives into one of those plays. That's great. And then he ends it all by saying, yeah, there were plays where we needed better performance from the quarterback position. Well, that seems to be now a direct calling out of your quarterback, who by all accounts you endorsed massively by putting him in that position in training camp and then trading away the incumbent in Drew Brown just a week ago. That's a little bit incongruous in my mind, and certainly at a moment when I think Jake Maier maybe deserved a bit more of a pat on the back, as much as I've personally been critical of him. So that was my takeaway from Dinwiddie's comments, was that he did not seem to be thinking through what he was saying as much as a head coach should.
Well, head coach and general manager, right? I mean, general manager can mean a lot of things. It could mean you're overseeing the entire roster. It could mean, well, I have final say, but I delegate a lot of those responsibilities. But you're the face of that franchise, right? And theoretically, you at the very least have final say on all decisions, which, yeah, when you're now calling out your players. And by the way, no, it wasn't an amazing jaw-dropping performance from Jake Maier, but the guy who you recently gave a vote of confidence, this was arguably his best game of the year. He completed 23 of 30 passes for 259 yards and a touchdown. Like, against a good Saskatchewan Roughriders defense, it's a pretty darn good performance. And I thought that at times he was able to push the ball downfield with success, something that we've not necessarily seen consistently from Jake Maier. So yeah, the timing of it is weird. And yeah, when a ball carrier's elbow touches the ground, they're down. That should also be stated. I'm not sure what the confusion was. And for context, JC, I want to get the quote right. He very explicitly said that the officials said his elbow was down. And this is a quote. They said McDonald's elbow hit the ground and his knees weren't down. What's the difference between an elbow and putting your head down to keep yourself up?
Hand down, I believe.
Yeah. Hand down, pardon me, to keep yourself up. Close quote. Elbow has always been down, has it not?
Yes, always. Hand is the only thing that can keep you up.
I admittedly looked at the rule book. I couldn't explicitly find a statement saying this is exactly what constitutes a tackle, but I was kind of alarmed to read that quote going, wait a minute, am surely I'm not right and Ryan Dinwiddie's wrong. He's a coach of the year and 2-time Grey Cup winner, and he also played this sport professionally for many years. I just write and talk about it and watch it, right? So I must be wrong, but no, certainly an elbow means you're down. I remember watching this play on television as it was happening, going, "Oh, he's clearly down," and Ryan Dinwiddie was losing his mind and seemed to be the only one doing so. So weird times in the nation's capital, I think is fair to say. And I'll ask you this, JC. So the Red Blacks, we all know they're 0-4. They go to Edmonton this week. They will then host the Blue Bombers, a game that, dare I say, could be the return of Drew Brown. They then go on bye. Do you think they get a win before their bye week at Edmonton, hosting Winnipeg?
They've played well at times in their last two games, right? They've taken Montreal and Saskatchewan to the brink. I think that needs to be prefaced. But no, I do not. I think Edmonton will be motivated next week. I think this is the type of comments that aren't going to rally people together, but sow doubt. And I think that's going to be a tough sell for them to win that game. The one against Winnipeg is a little bit more compelling. I think they could win that game, but ultimately, the better quarterback wins most football games. And despite what Ryan Dinwiddie thinks, if Drew Brown is the starting quarterback for the Bombers in that game, and again, we don't know what the status of Zach Collaros is going forward, so we can't say that with any certainty, but even if it is backup Drew Brown, he'll be the better quarterback than Jake Maier in that game. So I don't think that they're going to be able to get one in the win column before going on break.
So just to clarify, you said that the better quarterback wins most games. So that should mean that quarterback records are a decent indication of quarterback play. That's what you're saying?
Well, now you've painted me into a corner, Hodge. Come on now.
You painted yourself into a corner. Don't blame me, big boy. Come on.
Vernon Adams Jr. had one of the best single-game performances in CFL history this past week when he threw for 405 yards and 6 touchdowns, tying a Calgary Stampeders franchise record, and scored another along the ground in the victory. If the season ended today, would VA be the league's MOP?
It's a good question. And look, we got to give VA his flowers. This was one of the best single game performances I've ever seen from a quarterback. 7 touchdowns, if you include the rushing touchdown. He completed 80% of his passes. He had more touchdowns than incompletions, right? Levi Mitchell did this a few weeks ago. We gave him his praises. We got to give VA his praises as well. I've actually been kind of impressed with Toronto's defense through the start of the season. Jonathan Kongbo has, I think, done some really nice things off the edge, as has Andrew Chatfield. I had questions about their edge pressure going into 2026. They've since, I think, shown that they can get it. And then on the back end, I think James Caesar at boundary halfback has been a really nice find for this team. He's got a background in arena football. You go from covering a postage stamp to covering the CFL 65-yard wide field. That's a big change. He's done a brilliant job with it. So I was anticipating VA was going to play well in this game. I didn't think he was going to light up Toronto for tying the Calgary Stampeders franchise record for single game touchdown passes and finishing only 4 points shy of tying the franchise record for points in a game. 7 touchdowns, pretty exceptional. And I was also really impressed with how he spread the football around. Jalen Philpott was his favorite target on the day. He got 8 targets, made 7 catches for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Tevin Jones caught 4 balls, DeJean Brissett 3 balls, and then Clark Barnes and Eric Brooks both caught 2. All of them, except for Brooks, were over 60 yards receiving, and Philpott, Jones, Brissett, and Barnes each notched at least 1 touchdown. And Dietrich Mills also was still involved, 15 carries for 66 yards. It's not like this team completely eschewed the run game because VA was hot. No, they still kept maybe not a super balanced attack, but they kept relative balance on offense. So this was an amazing performance from the Stampeders. I think Pat Delmonico, the team's offensive coordinator, deserves credit here as well. As for the original question, JC, I mean, I think especially early in the year, the sample size is small enough that we tend to overreact from one week to another. I still think when you look at the West Division, Justin Rankin might be the best candidate right now just because he is on pace. Even though he had a poor rushing performance against the BC Lions this past week, he did hit 100 receiving yards. He's still on pace for 1,000. I think you got to respect that. You got to honor that. But I think it's between Rankin and VA out of the West Division right now. I mean, again, VA, 11 touchdown passes, no picks. He is quickly approaching the record for most touchdown passes in a season with no interceptions. Obviously, he's going to throw a pick at some point. It's not realistic to go 18 games for any player with no interceptions, but to be at an 11-0 ratio is pretty sensational. Out of the East, I was going to say it's Bo, but at this point, that's such a question mark. I don't know who I'd have coming out of the East. Tyson Philpott may be the number one option with Davis Alexander close behind him. So that would be my top four right now. I'll say it that way. If VA is the number one on that list right now, maybe, but it is early. I still think it's interesting to think about, to talk about, to debate about who the front runner is for MOP, even this early in the season. But at the very least, VA was exceptional in the Stampede Bowl. And kudos to the Stampeders for winning a second straight one. I know some people are Stampede Bowl haters. They're like, this is just a game the team invented. It's like breaking news. Every game is just something that a team or a league invented. Even the Grey Cup. Yeah, there's 100 years of history behind it, but I like that the Stampede Bowl is a unique game. It adds a little bit of luster, I think, to what would otherwise just be a normal regular season game. I wish the crowd had been a little better, but I also know that the Stampeders have a ticket specialty where however many points they scored in the previous game, you can then buy tickets to the next game for that percentage off. So at 58% off ticket prices for their next home game, there's no excuse to not have a massive crowd because you can get into a Stampeders game for very little money for their next home game.
I'm just thinking, Vernon Adams Jr. after his final touchdown in that game, in elation, pointing up into the sky as a very devout man, clearly praising God for his performance. Do you think the poor guy in the ticketing office who came up with that promotion was doing the opposite thing? Like, why, God, why? Why did you do this to me? Just white as a sheet as the points started to pile up.
It's a fair question. And I mean, look, yeah, you obviously don't want to give your tickets away. I think there's times across all professional sports where teams have given a ton of tickets away to paper the house and then come to regret that when fans didn't necessarily start paying for them themselves. And if anything, longtime ticket buyers got put off being like, oh, why am I financially supporting you if you're giving away thousands of tickets to people who don't necessarily care about the team? But it is always better to have more people in your building, even if it's for 58% off, because a lot of those people are going to buy a hot dog, a beer, or 10. They're going to buy a hat, a jersey, whatever, and you're making money that way. Parking, etc. Right? Game day is not just about ticket revenue. It's about the whole picture. So Stampeders crowds this year have not been great. We know that according to their team president, they've seen year-over-year growth in their season ticket base, which could be related to the fact that the Grey Cup is coming to McMahon Stadium later this year. But just looking at the crowds themselves, they've not been super impressive through a few home games. Hopefully, with the team putting up 58 points and incredible performances like this, that trend will change. And as we head into the later portions of the summer, McMahon, I won't necessarily be full. It's still a relatively large stadium, but it could at least be fuller as this team pushes for the playoffs.
I will answer the original question after dodging it a little bit there. VA would not be my pick for MOP at this time. I think my landscape for the award looks very similar to yours, although I might throw Trevor Harris a bone in that conversation as well, based on some of his performances this year with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But ultimately, it would come down to Justin Rankin versus Davis Alexander for me if I was to cast my ballot today, which of course would be a ridiculous proposition. However, with that said, Adams's performance in this game, I think, will go down as the best in his career. And it may be the best quarterback performance I've ever witnessed live in a CFL game as a viewer on television or in a stadium. It was that good. He was exceptional in every way. And it wasn't just that the Stampeders offense was dominating as a whole. I thought he made plays with his legs. I thought he made outside of the box plays. I mean, his last touchdown pass was thrown with his left hand while scrambling. That 22-yard touchdown run came at absolutely full value, right? There was exceptional plays made by VA in this game, and I don't know where we got this perception that somehow we're Calgary or VA haters. Certainly for me, I've been a VA believer for the last number of years, dating back to the end of his tenure here in BC. And I think this proved exactly what he is capable of at the top of his game. And if he keeps up at even a fraction of that pace, if he plays half as good as he did in this game in half of the games going forward, I think he could be the MOP of the CFL because that was truly sensational.
The BC Lions play the team's second and final game at the Apple Bowl in Kelowna. JC, you were once again in attendance. How was the atmosphere, and how much has the team's first win led you to believe in the squad?
The atmosphere was fantastic, first of all. Kelowna did a wonderful job hosting the Lions throughout the week. The Lions pulled off, frankly, a miraculous thing in the construction of that stadium and doing what they did for those two games. So full kudos to their entire staff, everyone who worked on that project, from owner Amar Doman to President Dwayne Vanu to Carolyn Cody to even the comms people like Matt Baker. Like, this was an accomplishment, a feat, a grandiose success in my mind. And even from the first game to the second game, some of the efforts that they made, little improvements, like there was complaints that fans in the stands couldn't hear the speakers properly for the stadium announcers. So they brought in more speakers. They made an improvement. They listened to feedback. They changed some of the IDing regulations based on some complaints from some senior citizens just to cater to the fans. So I thought it was a tremendous effort from the Lions and reflected very well on their organization. The victory also reflected very well on the Lions. And I'm not necessarily a believer yet that they are back to being Grey Cup contenders, but there was a lot of positive signs, right? I thought the offense performed well. They had greater balance. James Butler had an awesome performance. He was full value for all of his yardage. Nathan Rourke, I thought, played well. Defensively, they had some lapses in the secondary once again in the first half, but they held Edmonton to 3 points in the second half and Justin Rankin to just 19 yards rushing for the entire game. Yes, he had 100 yards receiving, but you can only hope to contain a guy like that, and they absolutely erased him on the ground. That was tremendous. And also 4 turnovers, and they could have had more in that game forced by the Lions defense after having 0 through their first 3 losses. That is a huge, huge turnaround. And I do want to give a shout out to Mike Benavides, the defensive coordinator, who has been roundly criticized throughout the start of the season, and frankly, rightly so at the start of the year based on their performances. But they've now improved in back-to-back weeks, moderately so. And he also had to handle a lot of the burden of that special teams coordinator by committee approach after the firing of Corey McDermott. He was the guy who was going out in all the special teams huddles, who had the play sheet, who was making the calls, who was talking to the kickers while also making the calls on defense. That is a lot of work for one man, regardless of how everyone else was helping him out. And he deserves a lot of credit for the fact that they improved in both of those phases.
Yeah, you and I went out on a bit of a limb, not a huge limb, but a bit of a limb, picking the BC Lions, both of us this week. And this was a situation where you have an 0-3 team hosting a 3-0 team. The Elks coming in hot with Justin Rankin again, killing everybody on the ground and through the air. And I thought the BC Lions not only won this game, I thought they outplayed the Edmonton Elks by a relatively considerable margin. Not an easy thing to do. The Elks are for real. I still believe that 100%. I thought that the BC Lions got beaten at the point of attack at the line of scrimmage pretty soundly their first three games, and this was the first time where finally you went, okay, this unit is stepping up. Ajou Ajou is starting to live up to the billing of a CFL Most Outstanding Defensive Player, and they also had some other pass rushers stepping up. I was kind of raising my eyebrow a little bit at the decision to sit Levi Bell, but the young guns that they brought in performed. And that's excellent for the BC Lions. When you disrupt the opposing passer, good things tend to happen, as was the case in this one. Cody Fajardo made some really nice throws, but he also threw 3 picks. And when you get 3 picks in a game, you typically win. I also think we should mention Austin Mack. I thought he played really poorly in Winnipeg in week 4. Some drops, some mental errors, it looked like. Whereas in this one, he looked like a true number 1 receiver, making some really sensational catches. That said, the BC Lions still got the best of the Elks in this one, a 12-point win, an earned win, a good win. And Darnell Sankey, I thought was maybe the best of the bunch for this team. I thought his late game interception to seal things was great. He was also a big part of the reason why Justin Rankin managed only 19 yards along the ground, considering that he'd had 3 straight 100-yard games coming in. I thought that was pretty darn impressive. I also really liked, in a very banged-up linebacking core, what we saw from Parker McKenna, the young gun out of Washington State. I thought he played really well. I also thought that not Caden Salter, who's the defense, Matthew Spatney, thank you, the defensive end who started opposite Ajou Ajou, looked really good. This guy is 21 years old. He played at Lehigh, a school I only know exists because a Canadian offensive lineman came out of Lehigh a few years ago in the draft. And I thought he looked good, applying some pressure to Cody Fajardo. He finished the game, I think, off the stat sheet, but he's somebody who at least flashed to me. And then Casey Sales, obviously, had a couple really nice pressures. He got the fumble recoveries. So I liked a lot what we saw from this BC Lions defense. I still think there's lots of work to be done. I don't think we should be crowning them. I don't think that we should be saying that, and I'm not saying you're saying this, JC, but I just in general on social media, I don't think we need to proclaim that, yes, this is the Grey Cup team everybody thought it was going to be. No, this was one win, but it was a game they really had to have against a really good opponent, and they got it done. And when you get a win in what was essentially a must-win game, you got to celebrate it, and I think the BC Lions should do so.
I think you highlighted a lot of the right performers there. Hodge, Parker McKenna in his first start was great. Darnell Sankey really stepped up. Sales. The guy that you didn't mention, I thought flashed a ton, was Hayden Harris, right? Their top draft pick from 2025, who had an NFL opportunity with it, arrived here late last season. He got a lot of the reps with Spatney at that opposite defensive end spot from Matthew Betts, and I thought he looked really good. Had a sack, a couple of noticeable pressures. There was a couple of plays where Justin Rankin was stopped for no gain or for a loss, where yes, it may not have been Harris who made the tackle, but it was him setting the edge with firm hands on the offensive tackle that really forced the play back inside and created that tackle. So I thought he was fantastic in that game. And it also looks like the Lions have found something here in guys like Nick Senecal and Jermaine Jackson, right? Which has only become possible because of the injuries in the receiving core. But I don't know how you take Jackson out of the lineup at this point. And he was a guy that maybe underperformed in his limited opportunities as a rookie, but the team was exceptionally high on coming into training camp. I had people tell me that it was going to be basically impossible for anyone to unseat Jermaine Jackson as that next starting receiver. And then he didn't have a great training camp in the eyes of the coaching staff. He was cut. Other guys jumped over him. It looked like he was done. And then he gets the call back because of that rash of injuries. In the last 2 games, he has made some excellent plays for the Lions offense. I think he's really become somebody that Nathan Rourke trusts. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for him because, at 5'6.5", he's got a lot of twitch and speed. And I think he falls into that category of some of the guys that we've seen in the past with that build who can develop into a really dynamic CFL offensive weapons. Your Tyler Sneeds, your Weston Dresslers, your Brandon Banks. He's got that type of potential if he continues to go with this trajectory.
I had one major problem with this game, and that is I had James Butler on the bench on my fantasy team.
Nobody cares about your fantasy team.
I know you say that, but I care about my fantasy team. And it maybe didn't matter because I was up against Ryan Ballantyne this week, who had Vernon Adams Jr. So I was doomed from the start. I will say I was sitting there watching Vernon Adams Jr. run in his touchdown number 7 in that game. My first thought was, man, it sucked to be up against VA in fantasy this week. And then I went, wait a minute, checked. And then my world fell apart as I realized I was up against him. So, hey, I'm 3-2 on the year. I'm going to keep talking about my fantasy team on the podcast just because I know it annoys you and Justin. So I'm gonna keep doing it, and hopefully the listeners like my fantasy updates. We're 3-2 in the 3Down Fantasy League. Credit to Ryan for the win. We tried our best. Let's go to your segment, JC.
Well, before we do, I do want to say, because I don't think listeners understand the context. You got incredibly unlucky this week, because Ryan Ballantyne only picks Stampeders for his fantasy team, and you matched up with him on the week where the Stampeders went off. So normally that's a nice little dub because he limits himself. But this week, you got thrown into the wood chipper. That I do sympathize with that, as much as I hate your fantasy team.
Yeah, I like that you've extended the fantasy segment, so let's keep talking about it. VA put up 48 points. Jalen Philpott, 27, Tevin Jones, 23, Clark Barnes, 14. These are guys that Ballantyne has on all of them on his roster. He's also got Eric Brooks and Dedrick Mills, though they had quieter days. I had 28 points from Chad Kelly, 28 points from DeMonte Coxie, 17 from Kenny Lawler. By the way, shout out Kenny Lawler for maybe in the first time in CFL history, catching a touchdown that was initially ruled an incompletion and catching or failing to catch a ball that was initially ruled a touchdown. I don't think I've seen that in the same game where your touchdown catch was initially an incompletion and what was initially a touchdown became an incompletion, regardless. But yeah, it was a poor week. I also had Tyler Common, who's been sensational for Toronto, but did nothing this past week. And Tommy Neild, who once Zach Collaros went down, was not going to see a whole lot of the football. So we're licking our wounds, but we're 3-2. And I'll give a league standing update since this is a riveting segment. And I know you're loving every single minute of it. The 3DownNation Fantasy League. Say that again?
I'm not part of the league, just so listeners know. I can't be bothered with this. Yeah, so listeners know,
that's fair. I am 3-2, as is our Edmonton contributor, Andrew Hoskins, as is Peter Klein, who's writes betting for us, Santino Filoso, who covers the Ottawa Redblacks for us. We're in a 4-way tie for first. Ryan is at 3-2, and then Griff Bourdignon out of Toronto is bringing up the rear at 1-4. So still anyone's game, still anyone's league. I'm excited for it, as I know you are, JC.
It's now time for JC's random neg lister, and with the status of Bo Levi Mitchell up in the air, the Hamilton Tiger Cats only have 2 other quarterbacks on the roster, neither of whom performed very well, as we highlighted at the top of the show. So who could they potentially bring in from their neg list? And there's a number of notable names that you could think about who might be available right away. Tommy Castellanos from Florida State is a guy who is unsigned currently and has been dynamic in the past. Blake Shappen out of Baylor is also available as a UDFA. Austin Reed, if they want to wait 30 days, just had a pretty nice season in the UFL. Ethan Garbers from UCLA is with the Frankfurt Galaxy. You could bring him over from Europe right now if you wanted to, but the name that sticks out to me, and I'm doing this a little bit because we don't have our friend Justin Dunk here on the podcast, and this name curdles his blood. I'm sure it'll pique his spidey senses, even when he's not recording. Clayton Tune out of Houston is available, a current free agent and on the Ticats neg list. This is a guy that we talked about a ton on the show because obviously the Green Bay Packers brought him in instead of Taylor Elgersma. He's made a couple of starts in the NFL, has not looked good in those, but was uber productive for the Cougars in college. And I think he's the type of guy that fits what Milanovic wants to do. He can stay in rhythm. He's not necessarily overly mobile, but he's going to make the reads that you tell him to make and get the ball out with efficiency. You're not going to be saved by a quarterback off the neg list this season. Obviously, learning the CFL game takes time, but if the Ticats wanted to go in that direction versus bringing in a proven commodity like a Jarrett Daggy, I think Clayton Tune would be an intriguing player that they could go out and get, a former 5th round draft pick of the Arizona Cardinals.
I also think Max Duggan could be a good pickup for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. This is a guy who went to a national championship game, was a Heisman finalist, runs a 4.5, like fast. Guy, maybe not the biggest arm, but like big enough to have been drafted by the NFL. Like I thought looked good in limited action with the Toronto Argonauts, but he's a free agent. He's on the street, so we'll see what happens. Hodge's heritage moment. On this day in 2008, Bob Ackles passed away at the age of 69. The native of Sarnia, Ontario, became a water boy at the BC Lions during their inaugural season in 1954 and eventually worked his way up to the position of general manager in 1975. The team went 112, 74, and 7 over his 11-year term, winning a Grey Cup in 1985. Ackles spent the next 14 years in NFL personnel jobs with Dallas, Philadelphia, and Miami. And though he was fired by Jerry Jones, Ackles drafted many of the players who went on to play key roles with the Cowboys' 3 Super Bowls in the early 1990s. The man returned to BC in 2002 to serve as the team's president and CEO, helping restore the Lions' dwindling attendance and finances. Ackles was inducted into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, and his autobiography, The Waterboy, is a must-read for any CFL fan. And as I read that, JC, it occurs to me I haven't read this book, I think, since it came out. So maybe I'll put that on my summer reading list. I remember really enjoying it, but I don't remember a lot of the details. Maybe it's time to brush up.
I think it is. I'm in the same boat as you, Hodge. And Bob Ackles' legacy in football in general, I think, has one of the greatest careers ever to cross leagues. And certainly he looms large with the BC Lions. I can remember when Bob Ackles died. I was 11, 12 years old. And the team was going to do a ceremony to honor him at their next game. And we were season ticket holders at the time. But my parents had tickets to a James Taylor concert that they bought for all of us on the same day as the Bob Ackles game. And I was gutted. I was devastated. I threw a fit because I'm like, how could we disrespect the legacy of Bob Ackles by not attending this football game and going to a concert up the road? I stand by that decision to this very day, although I do enjoy the crooning of James Taylor. My parents made the wrong call.
Are James Taylor and Alan Doyle the only 2 singers you listen to?
No, I listen to many singers that you've never heard of, Hodge. Folk music artists. Okay. I love them.
Okay.
John Mort Hannon. You could go with that. Sing about some coal mines. That's always good. William Prince, who was performing at a Bombers game, I sent you some of that. He's amazing. Great musician from your home province of Manitoba. Check him out, folks.
I'll have to do that. You can't hear anything from the press box in Winnipeg. The audio is all garbled. So I have no idea what he sounds like, but I should check him out and support a local artist. Let's go to the 3-minute drill. The Saskatchewan Roughriders used short yardage quarterback Tommy Stevens as a finisher in their victory over the Ottawa Redblacks. Can anyone hope to stop touchdown Tommy in crunch time?
I'm not sure they can. And frankly, this gives me hope that my crazy fantasy idea that a team should go full quarterback run game, wing T, triple option offense, and go with a guy like Tommy Stevens as your starter. It would actually work in the CFL. May not be as crazy as I thought. I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders should use this package more often. Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterback Zach Collaros had to skip Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's wedding due to his football commitments, revealing to reporters that he told the couple that they, quote, could have looked at the damn schedule, unquote. Hodge, what was your reason for skipping the ceremony?
It appears my invitation got lost in the mail. The cast of reality TV show Canada Shore, a show that apparently exists, made an appearance at BC Lions practice this week, but appeared to rub some players the wrong way, with QB Nathan Rourke saying that he couldn't be a fan of the show after the way they behaved. Is he justified in his disdain?
That killed me. Oh my, yeah. I was unaware that Canada Shore existed either. It sounds like they were a little bit disrespectful with some of their conduct at the practice, running onto the field in the middle of activities to be the water girls and things of that nature. Certainly when you're an 0-3 football team, that's not something that your leadership group, like head coach Buck Pearson and Nathan Rourke, would like to see. Although it should be noted, James Butler, who had a fantastic game the next day in Kelowna, is a fan of Canada Shore. He watches the show with his fiance, and he thought it was pretty cool that they were out there. So not everybody hated their appearance. The Calgary Stampeders signed Ajou Ajou after he was reinstated by the Canadian Football League. Was there a strong market for him?
I was led to believe that there were in and around 4 teams who wanted to sign Ajou, and the Stampeders were the early front runner. And I think that's really interesting because the Stampeders have such a strong Canadian contingent in that receiving corps. That's maybe not the team I would have expected to be the front runner. But by that same token, this is a guy who's from Brooks, Alberta. I believe Brooks is closer to Edmonton than it is Calgary, but they're not exactly far apart to begin with. And if this team ever gets Damian Alford back after he was waived by the New Orleans Saints, I mean, an already very good Canadian contingent in that receiving corps is just going to get even better. Now, it should be noted, Joe still has to serve 5 more games of suspension. The first suspension was this game against the Toronto Argonauts in week 5. So we will not see him on the field for a while, but he should be available for the Stamps come kind of the 2/3 mark of the way into the season. Christian Covington announced his retirement from football this past week. How will you remember the longtime NFLer who spent 2 recent seasons with the BC Lions?
Well, I spent a lot of time around Vancouver College, the high school that Christian Covington attended, where he is absolutely revered, not just for his performances on the field, but also his personality and his kindness and his leadership. So I've heard a lot of good things about him. I'll certainly remember him on those defensive lines with the Houston Texans alongside J.J. Watt. But I think the thing that will stick out the most is his rookie appearance on Hard Knocks when they were in camp with the Texans after he had been drafted, where they did a segment on Christian Covington, essentially arguing that he was just a nerd who liked to read books. Isn't that sweet? I love it when a football player likes to show some intellect. The Ottawa Redblacks cut QB Nick Vattiato after they waited 2 years to sign him off their negotiation list. What do you make of that?
I mean, clearly they're really high on not just Jake Mayer, but also McLeod Bethel-Thompson and Bryson Barnes, their 3rd stringer. Though Vattiato was cut before Barnes got stuffed near the end of that football game, leading to a Red Blacks loss. Not saying Barnes lost the game for them, but it was not a great play. Though it was a great play from Jackson Ford. Really good defensive play. The Edmonton Elks signed global linebacker Tyron Vrede after he was released by Saskatchewan. Was that a good pickup?
I think it's a great pickup. They are banged up in that linebacking core with Nick Anderson and now Brock Mogensen on the 6-game injured list, as well as global Ateva Maga-Clements. I think Vrede can step in as a depth piece, upgrade your special teams, and quite frankly, Daryl Jabome, apologies, their first-round pick from this year struggled a little bit in his first start. I believe Vrede can take some of the pressure off the youngster as well. The Montreal Alouettes have released kicker Lewis Ward after bringing him in as insurance. Did that surprise you?
No, because he was signed basically because Jose Maltos Diaz was dealing with a groin injury. And I think there was some concern that on the off chance Maltos Diaz couldn't go, they needed someone ready to perform. That did not end up happening. Maltos Diaz was able to play, didn't miss any time. So I'm sure the Alouettes liked having Ward there. I still think Lewis Ward is a good kicker. I think he'll get another chance in 2026, but it makes sense if you've got a kicker who is healthy and not missing time to not necessarily carry one on the practice roster. The only reason to keep him around, JC, would be you're worried someone else is going to pick him up. So maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. We'll see. Again, I don't think we've seen the last of Lewis Ward, but for right now, he is a free agent. For JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter in your inbox every day, and it costs you $0. So why not sign up? It's free. It's fun. All the latest news, insight, and analysis in there every single day, even the weekends. You got to love it.